Minutes after the latest debate with Fiona Bruce.
As the country, or much of the country, works itself into a frenzy over England's run to the Euros final, here it's politics as usual. Now, Keir Starmer can't take responsibility for England's success, much as I'm sure he'd like to, but he is responsible for delivering on the enormous political changes he's promised in the coming months and years. It's early days so far, but how's he doing? Tonight we're in Colchester in Essex, one of the many, many places that turned from Conservative blue to Labour red in last week's election. And our audience, of course, reflects the new electoral picture across the country. More on that in a moment. For now, welcome to Question Time. Tonight's panel from the Labour government is Peter Kyle. He is the new Secretary of State for Science, Technology and Innovation, a job he's been in for about 6 days now. George Freeman was re-elected last week as Conservative MP for Mid-Norfolk. He'd served in Rishi Sunak's government as a senior minister in the very department Peter Kyle now runs. Sian Berry is one of 4 new Green MPs and represents Brighton Pavilion. She led her party for 3 years until 2021, resigning due to an internal conflict over trans rights. And Camilla Cavendish is contributing editor and columnist at the Financial Times and a crossbench peer. She's also a senior fellow at Harvard University and was director of policy for Prime Minister David Cameron. Good evening. Welcome to our panellists, welcome to our audience here in Colchester. Great to see you, and of course, welcome to you at home as well. I just want to say a word about the selection of our audience, as I mentioned just now. Obviously, we have a new government, so the makeup of our audience has changed. So now, more people in this audience voted Labour than for any other single party. And of course, the opposition and other parties are represented in fair numbers too, and that's what we will see as the series goes on. OK, should we start with our first question, which is from Kyle Evans.
Proposals to build houses are admirable, but how do Labour plan to combat NIMBYism and labour shortages to achieve their targets?
Right, so this is a big new policy of the Labour government. Keir Starmer said he would bulldoze through planning restrictions. His target is to build 1.5 million homes over 5 years. Along with that, to address the second half of your question, there are shortages of stonemasons, bricklayers, joiners and carpenters. I mean, according to one industry, about 33,000 more bricklayers are needed. Peter.
Thanks. Firstly, I accept the challenge of your question. What I don't want to do is pit this against NIMBYs, against people who want to build. We need to, every community, even those who are find it challenging to build in their own community or near their own community, accept that we do need more homes in our country, in our region and in areas as well, because most people want their kids to grow up and live in the area that they grew up in if that's what they want to do. So what we will do is set targets again, because the previous government dropped the targets because it was too challenging for their own side. We are going to reinstate those targets. We're going to reform the entire planning framework, the national planning framework, and we will inject into it priorities. We're going to work closely with local authorities, using the power that local authorities have, and insist that they do build houses in their area. But where we need the power and the assertive power of central government, then we will act. We're going to build towns for the first time in an entire generation. We're going to make sure that those new houses also reflect the needs, the social need of houses, so social rented and also affordable housing.
And what about the shortage of workers? That's the other half of Carl's question.
Well,
Can't magic them up out of nowhere.
Well, what we can do is set a plan to get those in place. So we were at the start. We've only been in power for a short amount of time. These plans will come and unfold. The ambition has to be set at the start. We have to work through these challenges. And yes, there will be challenges with materials. There will be challenges with infrastructure. There's going to be challenges with the workforce. But that shouldn't stop us setting the ambition and solving those issues. Right around these different sectors, we see companies, we see innovators, we see our country in all these different sectors solving these challenges, creating wealth and delivering for the British public. Why can't we have a government that sets out with that same sense of ambition and one by one tackles those challenges? Everything you've put forward can be solved if we have the right approach, a government that works with partners in all different sectors, all different regions, and in all different parts of our country to solve them. That partnership will be there. but we're setting out with the direction and the sense of ambition and scale of ambition to get it done.
Let's look at that, because you say we will insist that local authorities build homes in their area. So I took the liberty of just checking out you three. Camilla, you're exempt, as you're not a politician. So, Peter, you expressed concern about a block of flats in your constituency. I did. So you weren't too chuffed about those being built. George, you expressed concern about houses in your constituency in 2020. And Sean, you opposed building 1,200 homes in East London for various reasons. The point being, half of your question is about NIMBYism, which is used as a pejorative term. When people object to houses being built in their area, it's usually for a pretty good reason, certainly as far as they're concerned. And this is what it comes... All three of you, when actually confronted with it, have said, well, I'm not too sure about that.
Let me answer. Have more housing in Norfolk than anyone else.
Well, OK, but nonetheless, I mean, just when it actually comes to the facts of it, you've all gone, ooh, maybe not.
Yeah,
let's do it. OK, I know I'm absolutely going to let you answer it, but those are the facts.
So in the community that I represent in Parliament, we've built well over 3,000 homes in a very built-up area over the course of the last Parliament. And yes, I did oppose one development. You can get houses being built, you get homes being built in sometimes very dense and difficult areas. If you lead communities through it, there'll be some things that are inappropriate. We're not saying build inappropriate housing. We're saying get it right, but the sense of determination has to be there to build.
So you'd have been happy if a local authority said, Peter Kyle, it's all very interesting, but no, we're going to build it anyway.
3,000 homes. One development of almost 1,000 homes was rejected first time. I went back and led a series of community meetings, and we took the community forward. That housing development is now almost built. People will be moving in September. You can lead communities through difficult decisions. Incidentally, that particular development changed profoundly by involving the community with it. That's the sort of thing that we want.
My point is, it's all very well talking the talk, but when it comes to walking the walk, people tend to object.
Well, I have walked the walk. My constituency's had 5,000 houses, which is why we had a boundary change. It's on the outskirts of Norwich. And I'll just tell you why I think Peter and Rachel Reeves are right to reform the planning system. I'm on record for 10 years of saying it's broken. It's not a planning system. It's a development application control system. It's not a planning system. But I think the approach of top-down command and control, I understand why you're doing it, but I think it'll fail, because you tried it before. John Prescott had these housing targets. The man from Moscow decided East Anglia would have whatever it was, 1.4 million houses, and Norfolk would have 800,000, and Breckland, my district, would have 80,000. It didn't work. And that's why the Conservatives, we introduced a different approach, which was you have to have a 20-year plan in your district. You can't just have it, you've got to build it out. And if you're not building at the 5-year land supply rate, then developers can force development on you.
And as we've seen, that's not worked either.
No.
In that we have a critical
I understand,
shortage of
which
housing.
is why I think reform of the planning system is right. What I'd like is a planning system in my part of the world. What we're seeing is big, greedy developers dumping huge commuter housing estates on the outskirts of villages and towns with no investment in infrastructure. The place is flooding. The public services are on their knees. So what I would like, I think the new town plan is good. I think most counties in this country could probably have one new town somewhere where you would improve the view on a railway line, please. We're not going to achieve net zero dumping new towns. I've got one that's being proposed in the middle of absolutely nowhere in Norfolk. It'll turn the most beautiful bit of English countryside and habitat, the Wensum Valley, into a traffic jam, and it'll put more pressure on public services.
Let me bring Sean
in. So it's the wrong model. We need reform, but not like that.
Well, Sean, obviously, I know you want to talk about the fact that you objected to 1,200 homes in East London. Isn't the point that there will always be a valid reason for not wanting them, and other people will take a different view?
Well, there's a lot of sense...
And that's what's always happened.
There's a lot of sense been talked on this panel so far, that the planning system is reactive. It isn't like you'd want to see local communities thinking about what homes they want to have in their area and planning for them and having the ability to build them. What's missing from Labour's plans, which are all about targets, planning reform, setting ambition, what's missing is investment. And what I have worked for in my previous jobs is real investment in real social housing. What we need is government giving councils the grants, the ability to borrow money, which is a very, very good investment, to build new council homes on their own land, to get hold of land that developers are sitting on planning permission.
Is it only council homes you're talking about, Sean? Because I'm just looking at the Green record. You've got Green Council in Bristol and Kent, for example, rejected housing plans. They've even rejected plans for a solar energy farm. So do you really want more building?
We do, and we want to put the money into it.
Because it doesn't look like it.
So we need to not only build more council homes. We need to give councils the ability to do that in conjunction with local communities. We need to be buying
Unless you
homes.
object.
We need to be changing the definition of what's affordable. Where there have been objections, it's usually because, like George just said, the houses are not affordable. They're not the homes that people need in that local area. Often people will object to a planning application because the proportion of affordable housing is very, very low. This government has not changed the definition of affordable from the ludicrous 80% of market rates since forever. And the new Labour government's not promising to do that either. We need council homes, we need affordable homes for key workers.
You've made your point.
Greens would invest real money in that, and that is the plan we need. The planning system is a little bit of a red herring here. There's a lot of planning permission out there.
Camilla, I'm going to bring you in a minute. I just wanted to go back to Carl, who's got his hand up. Now, Carl, I think you're a quantity surveyor, is that right? Because we check out all our audience, so we kind of know what most of you do, and I checked you out because we were choosing you for a question. What's your view of what you've heard, and what do you think the answer is?
I've mainly worked more in the NHS sector, actually, rather than housing, but I know from my experience, Labour is short, drives up cost. You end up with substandard finish and quality. So from that point of view, that was my thinking. The NIMBYism part was more really local. We've been promised a new town out at Elmstead for God knows how many years, and no one there wants it, but we all need it. House prices around here have astronomically gone up. The only way I was able to get on the housing ladder was through help from family. Otherwise, I'd probably still be living at home like other people in their 30s, the same age as me. So,
Man in the white T-shirt.
I think it's all well and good saying that we, surely everyone would be interested. Are people from that area actually moving into those houses you've built, or are they coming from outside areas? I've got friends that live in Bury St Edmunds. They're having to move to Stowmarket in order to commute to Bury St Edmunds to stay where their family is. Like, that's not sustainable for the model that you guys are suggesting.
Right, OK, let's hear from one more person. Yes, a woman here in the purple top in the front. We'll just get a microphone across to you. No, in the purple top. There you go.
Hello, yes. I believe we need a lot more social housing. I live in the Braintree area, and we've had hundreds and hundreds of executive houses built, but nothing for the local people. And there hasn't been any social housing built for a very long time. They're building us affordable housing, but it's social housing rent we need.
So, Camilla, thank you. Camilla, let me come to you. So, Carl's question is, how do Labour combat NIMBYism and labour shortage? And just looking at NIMBYism, I mean, when you look at local MPs, for obvious reasons, you want the vote, are often in a position where they're objecting to housing because it's not popular locally.
Well, I think we've heard some of the reasons why it's not popular locally, and too often the housing that's being built is, as Kyle said, it's substandard. It doesn't include infrastructure. Some of it's being built on floodplains, and we've seen the result of that. And actually, quite often, local people are completely right. They raise those concerns and they're not listened to. Developers basically build and sell on, and that's the end of that. There's quite a lot I think we can do about that. We should be giving tax breaks to older people who live in big family homes, many of whom would love to move out and downsize, and we're not building the right stuff for them. That could actually release millions of family homes for people without us having to build a single new thing, but no government has done it. We should be building more social housing for the younger generation, which has absolutely been pushed out. And the context of all of this, to go back to what Kyle said about the labour shortages, we've got a very rapidly growing population. England is quite a densely populated country. We've got about 10 million more people than we had in the 1970s, and we have to accommodate that. And there is a clash between housing and immigration. And I think the more honest we can be about that, the better, because we just have to have that debate. But right now, the key, I think, is actually what Peter Kyle said, which is build really good quality, really beautiful new towns, but don't stand for anything less.
OK, let's hear the man in the green, just at the front here.
Surely we're missing part of the problem here in terms of building is part of the solution, but can't we do something with second homes, making those more affordable to people? And, there's a lot of property that goes unused in a lot of towns and cities.
This is the point about buying homes. There are many, many homes that ought to be brought into use as social housing. And councils are very, very willing, when they've got the grants available, to go and buy those and turn them into real social housing.
You're talking about people, sorry, you're talking about people who have two houses.
Moving homes that are second homes into primary homes, not secondary homes that are only populated 1 or 2 weeks a year.
Right.
Yeah, exactly that. And then also, we've got the problem of genuine affordability, which is when you build homes, setting the level right, but also we need rent controls so that places like Brighton, where the housing crisis is absolutely out of control, have the ability at a local level to say what a fair rent is and enforce that. And if we had that, that would make an enormous difference to so many people's lives. They're struggling so much in the private rented sector, and that's a growing tenure. We need to switch things back to real council housing and make sure that people are able to save up to buy, which basically no one in the private rented sector can at the moment.
Because our programme is slightly truncated now, we're 45 minutes long instead of an hour long, I'm going to move on, so forgive me those you got your hands up, and take another question from Diana. Diana Smith.
With the huge backlog in the courts and prisons full, how can police crack down on crime?
So the Prison Governors Association has recently warned that jails are due to run out of space within days. There are something like 1,400 spaces left in the whole of England and Wales, and the government, as I understand, Peter, please confirm if this is the case, is likely to announce tomorrow that rather than prisoners being released for many crimes, not all, after they've served half their sentence, they will be released after they've served 40 or 45% of their sentence. What is the answer to this, George? I mean, you've obviously had 14 years in government, and we're at crisis point.
Yeah. No, this is one of the... I think all governments have successes and failures, and I think this is one where we've not succeeded. We've succeeded in some areas. There's 20,000 more police and there's more people being arrested, and crime on the streets is down in most places, not everywhere. But the criminal justice system, I'm not a lawyer, it's not my background, I've focused on the economics side of government, but it's pretty clear. We promised, I think, to build, 8,000 or 9,000...
You promised
6,000 more prison places.
20,000
and we built 6.
6,000, yeah.
And Robert Buckland was on the other night, the former Justice Secretary, saying he couldn't get it through the Planning Permission and the Treasury weren't prepared to fund it. And so I think it's a muddle. I totally accept that. And I welcome the appointment of James Timpson. The Timpson family are extraordinary. They've done brilliant work.
So Timpson, he's Prisons Minister.
He's the new Prisons Minister, and he's come in after a long career with the Timpson family, helping ex-offenders get into work, and there's no one in the country who's done more work on this. And I think his point that basically a third of people in prison really need to be there. A third, ideally, would be being rehabilitated properly and out quickly. And a third should never be there in the first place. There are many women in prison who just shouldn't be there. Now, I'm not an expert on the criminal justice system, but in the end, you have to, at source, we've got to try and tackle the cause of bad behaviour, of the drug crime that's riding through the country, the county lines bringing hard drugs up into places like Norfolk. I mean, there's a whole ecosystem of crime in this country, and just arresting people and locking them up is a sticking plaster, really. The really deep question we've got to ask is, why are so many people drawn into a life of crime? Why are so many people attracted to the short-term hit of drugs? Why are so many people getting into this world in the first place? And that is a really deep and profound question. I don't think any party...
And would you agree with, if Labour do announce tomorrow that they will start releasing prisoners, apart from those who've committed particularly violent crimes or sexual offences, 40% of time into their sentence as opposed to halfway through their sentence? Would you agree with that? Well, given the current crisis?
Honestly, I'm not an expert on this, but I don't think they have a lot of choice. But what I would like to see is people who've committed, antisocial behaviour, who've been not violent crime. I'd like to see them out on the streets doing some community service. I'd like to see them in my constituency sweeping up and tidying up, not being spat at, but just putting something back into society. And I think we could take quite a lot of people out of the prison system and help to rehabilitate them in that way, not bagging them up in very expensive and dysfunctional prisons.
So, Peter, can I just check with you? This is certainly what the BBC is reporting, as I understand it, that the government's going to announce this plan tomorrow. And it's something that's supported by the previous Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk. Is that the case?
I can't pre-announce what's going to be announced tomorrow, and you'll understand that I can't. Diana, I just want to answer your question directly. What is frustrating for me and us right now is to hear Alex Chalk, who was the Justice Secretary this time last week, immediately saying that he has left a broken system, saying some very, very strident things about what should happen, but what he didn't do when he was in. He spoke a lot, and George has spoken quite a lot, about the tough choices that needs to be made, but they're making these statements after they've left office. We've been in office for 5.5, 6 days, and tomorrow you will hear some statements about those tough choices. The difference is we're not going to wait until we're out of office before we start talking about these tough choices. We will confront them. We will be honest about the tough choices. Because just like in a whole series of other areas, in the NHS, in our public services, crumbling schools, an economy with no growth, we have inherited an extremely difficult set of circumstances. Now, when it comes to prisons, it means that we have full prisons, we have courts that want to send more people away to keep people safe, and everything that George said about the long term, I agree with. We do need to get better. Prison needs to get better at reforming people, helping them make better choices. But we have a problem right now, today, right now, in this week and this month. And you will hear us to do what it takes to make sure we can keep people safe as absolutely possible.
Can I just ask you, one thing that Alex Chalk said, the previous Justice Secretary until last week, was that one of the reasons that he didn't go down the route of having people serve only 40% of their sentence was it was just considered sort of politically toxic by the then Prime Minister. And another thing he was talking about was you know, having people not go to prison at all for certain kinds of sentences. But again, he was worried, I think I'm right in saying, that might be something that was not acceptable to voters, possibly to people in our audience here. Is that something Labour is prepared to grasp?
We will do what it takes to keep people safe, and then more to help prisoners who are in there make the right choices when they come out, in order that people are safe in the long term, and to reduce the reoffending, which has gone up in the last decade, not gone down.
On that note, I'm going to come to you, Wayne, in the audience here. As you know, we do a bit of research on all of you. We're not the FBI, but we'd like to know who's in our audience, as you know. And when we talked earlier on, and I know that you are happy for me to say that you were an offender for a short period of time. You were in prison for a short period of time, 20-odd years ago now.
Yeah.
And your experience when you came out, because you were talking about trying to encourage people not to reoffend, or possibly not to go to prison in the first place, what was your experience when you came out? How difficult was it for you?
So basically, when I was inside, it's all very much education, you've got to do something. And the moment I left, it was like falling off a cliff. And if it wasn't for my family and friends, I would have just gone straight back in. And doing research on the people who I was inside with, they all pretty much are still in prison today. It's just, there's no help.
It's just a revolving door.
Yeah.
And so
you know, no one wants to employ you, do they? So it's just really hard to...
Is that something you found?
Yeah, I mean, even if it was 20 years ago, in lockdown recently, I applied for a supermarket and they just flat out said no because, you know, criminal record.
Even though it was such a long time ago?
Yeah.
And
so
was relatively brief?
I've had to go self-employed, and I've been pretty much self-employed ever since. So.
And if you, I mean, I don't put you on the spot here, but I mean, are there any answers, any obvious answers you can see in terms of reducing the number of people either who go to prison or go to prison and keep reoffending?
Who, me?
Yeah.
From my experience, obviously some people need to be locked away, but I would say I did witness some people that would have probably benefited from a different form of punishment, not necessarily just, you know, locking them up and letting brain rot, basically watching TV for 6 months. I got more job opportunities in prison.
Of a dubious variety?
Yes.
Than you did outside?
Yeah, and I think some people obviously take them up. You know, it's not a good place to go.
Camilla?
I think it's really brave of you to come on and talk about that.
Yes, so do I.
I think the situation's actually even worse. The truth is that the early release, which is about to happen, Peter, you're saying obviously the government will try and keep people safe, but the truth is that the Conservatives privatised the probation service, which was a catastrophe. So it is going to be even less easy to judge who is actually poses a risk and who doesn't. The courts have tremendous backlogs, which actually means you can't necessarily get your trial heard for several years. And the truth is that I think the criminal justice system it's actually a vital social service. It's actually as important as health and education, but it's always the one that's been cut. And we have to reverse that. And to your... Thank you. Just Just a quick word about James Timpson, who is the new Prisons Minister. His brother Ed was a Conservative minister who was tireless in his work for children in care, and a lot of those children end up in prison. James Timpson's father, John Timpson, and his wife fostered 90 children when James and Ed were growing up. So I think they will have a whole ecosystem view of the fact that, as you said, there's quite a few people who don't need to be there, and there's a new approach that's needed. I really think with half of people in prison reoffending, there's an awful lot we can do, as you said, when you come out. That's what Timpson will do, and I'm really hoping that this government may now appoint Fergal Sharkey to take on the water industry. Could get even better.
Let me get the green Sean.
Thank you from me too, Wayne. That thing you said about when you leave, you get some support within prison and then you're handed over and it feels like falling off a cliff. It really chimes with some of the work I've done, which has been talking with and listening to women leaving prison. It is... The Howard League has described the entire criminal justice system as being on the precipice of failure, and
what do you think should be done?
There's no linking up, and each of these are real people's lives, and women being sent to prison for short sentences often lose their home and their children. That has enormous impacts, harming society for many, many years to come. These people are worth investing in, and it needs something from the new government.
That fewer people should go to prison?
So just releasing people from prison to cure the incredibly poor conditions that there are within current prisons because of overcrowding. The local prison to me in Brighton has seen nearly a 70% increase in violence between prisoners in recent years.
So
the prison population has doubled.
Is it build more prisons? Is it send fewer people to prison? What is
it? It is help people in ways that are not prison, and help people who are leaving prison to genuinely start new lives. And if we're talking about the causes of crime, I mean, there are criminals who are criminals out there, but there are also many people in prison for crimes that are driven by poverty, by austerity, by not being invested in by the whole of society and feeling hopeless. And we can cure that with more investment in people. But this is over to the Labour government. We have to see more day-to-day spending on public services, and they're not currently promising that. And I hope that Peter will go away and join his cabinet ministers and start arguing for more day-to-day investment in people, because it's the only cure for this. There's no shortcut.
All right. Let's see. The man in the green top there, yeah.
Hi, thank you again to Wayne for sharing that. And just going back to his point about how some people being in prison, not needing to be in prison, or maybe benefiting from another punishment. There's obviously overwhelming data showing that actually a lot of people in prison are in there for minor offences, petty offences, or minor drug offences. Do the panel think that maybe they would benefit from a different punishment, and could maybe perhaps the Greens' policy of decriminalising drugs actually help with that issue?
All right, let me just hit from Lana. Yes.
I'm a little bit concerned about Labour bypassing all of these things onto the previous Conservative government, because one of the big issues that comes out of all of this, and housing, health service, prison service, is money. And one of the big scandals was carried out by Gordon Brown with PFI contracts.
The Private Finance Initiative, which was a way of just so people, they're not aware, the Private Finance Initiative, which was a way of building a big infrastructure projects, in particular hospitals, using private finance and then paying back the money over some period of time at possibly very high rates.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we're going back a few years, and obviously, you know, monetary terms, things were different then. But 57 billion got invested in capital projects, so that the Labour Party could say that it had done this and it had done that. At this point in time, we still owe £160 billion on this. We still owe that. And that is all coming off the bottom line before we do any of this spending. And those contracts weren't just for the period of the last Conservative government. Those contracts were for 25 to 30 years. Now, Rachel Reeves has talked about British Investment Bank, which includes people like BlackRock, Larry Fink, and all the rest of it.
I might need you to get to the question.
Yeah. But what you need is money. And the good old traditional way of raising money was government bonds. And it seems to me that what we're about to get into with this British Investment Bank, Larry Fink and Lloyds Bank and all the rest of it, is effectively backdoor privatising. I mean,
OK, so we're talking about prisons. Are you talking about privatising of prisons? Is that what you're worried about? I'm just trying to get where you are, because we're a bit short of time.
Prisons, hospitals,
OK,
the
whole kit and caboodle.
None of that stuff we currently own.
There certainly was lesson to be learned from the early days of PFI. PFI has been going on all the way through. It's just we've learned the lessons of the way the contracts were led. When you look at the way that PFI has been used successfully, then it has delivered hospitals, it's delivered libraries, it's community facilities that I don't think anybody would point at and say, I wish we didn't have those. We do need to get a relationship with the private sector investment landscape, investors, and with government to deliver for people. Because at the moment, we're living in an era with zero growth and the highest taxation since the Second World War. You know, there has to be a way forward that gets growth into the economy, that doesn't overburden the taxpayers any more than the inheritance we've been left with the last 14 years of Conservative rule. We are talking about the future, but we have to be really honest about the mess that we're in. We have to be honest about the starting point we have. Every time you have an election and a change of government, which is 14 years, before that 13 years, before that 18 years, you don't start at a new place. You start with the inheritance that you've been given. We've been given a very, very difficult set of circumstances. To raise the money to invest in our public services, we have to be creative. And we are leveraging on the back of with the investment bank. We will be leveraging £3 of private money for every £1 of public money. We need that kind of creativity.
You hope, obviously.
We need that kind of partnership to really get our country going again.
Very briefly, because I want to move on. The man back there asked about an easing, if not a total deregulation, possibly, of drugs in order to keep more people out of prison. Is that something that Labour's considering?
We're not looking at that now. Look, very few people actually, for the offences that you mentioned, very few people would go to prison for their first offence on those areas. You know, prison. Okay. You know, so we do need to look at offences. There is no plans to legalise drugs. I want to be very clear about that. But we do need to look at how we do avoid prison for certain people. We've been saying this for a very long time. But when it comes to other kinds of sanctions, if there is a victim involved, those victims must be involved in that decision themselves. Right. And that is absolutely crucial, and that's something that our victims bill and the victims policies we've come up with would make sure that victims are in the lead in these things, because you can't have a system that overrides victims when it comes to some of the crimes that are being committed against them.
I'm only rushing you because we're a slightly shorter programme this evening. Now, a complete change of mood just for a minute, because lots of you asked about this. It's not our usual question time fare, but we're going to give it 3 or 4 minutes. Jennifer Beattie, where are you? Off you go.
Gareth Southgate's arguably England's best manager in decades. Why does he seem to come in for so much more criticism than he does gets credit?
OK. It's not our usual thing, but loads of you wanted to talk about it, so come on, we are here to serve. Sian, I don't know if you've been following the footy.
I mean, I have. I'm not the expert. My family are the experts on this. During the football, the text was going mad, and yes, they are very critical of the England manager, always. But as soon as that goal was scored, it was St Southgate. So, yeah, we do recognise that he's been a different kind of leader, and I think one that potentially invites people to criticise him more just because of his style. But he's delivering at the moment, so let's give him some applause.
George, what do you think?
Well, I think it's a brilliant question. We've heard a lot about leadership, not least from my party in the last few years.
I think we're going to be hearing a bit more.
Not enough celebration of people who actually show it. And Gareth Southgate is one of the people who really has. Your question is, why do they attract such criticism?
Yeah, why has he not been given more credit? That's
in this country, yeah. And I think it's partly we have a cultural problem here. We love to pull people down. We love, it goes right back in our history, when people get too big for their boots, we pull them down. Gareth Southgate is not too big for his boots. He's led us to successive reversals of long-standing failure. He deserves all the plaudits. And he's done it by real attention to detail, process, management, team, all the things we should be celebrating. And frankly, we need a bit more of that in our politics as well.
Man in the green shirt with the glasses.
I wondered if perhaps the World Cup winning Sir Clive Woodward would be an example of how we should be treating Mr Southgate.
Yes, of course, when England won. Yes, I remember that very well in my house. The man in the blue jumper there, yeah.
Well, it's very simple. He comes in for a lot of stick because he's been blessed with a crop of quite fantastic players and incredibly lucky draws in the last 3 major finals, and he's fluffed it.
There you go. I have to say, I mean, that is a view that you hear. Exactly. I mean, that is a view you hear. Clearly, we haven't won, but we've done...
Or lost.
Or lost, but we've got very far with him, that is for sure. Man in the black shirt, further back. Yes, there you are.
Evening. If he wins on Sunday, he's going to be the best manager since Alf Ramsey.
Ain't that the truth? Peter?
Well, I think that's it's answered. I don't follow football, and I'm always really honest about it. I do anything for my local club, the Brighton Hove Albion. They're incredible, but I don't follow football. So for me, observing this and watching the games, it's really odd that he gets so much criticism for winning, but not winning in the way that people want him to win.
Well, people sit at home and they say, "Oh, why aren't you starting with a different team? Because Arsenal didn't play very well. Why was the game a bit lacklustre in the first few matches? Why isn't he bringing on subs quick?" It's all that kind of stuff.
All valid criticisms, I'm sure, but the savagery of it, you know, the brutality of it, the personal nature of it, was observing it as somebody who doesn't follow.
Plastic glasses.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and so those things were difficult to understand as somebody that's not evangelical about the sport. But he's got us to where we are. Look, at the end of the day, I think what he will be really concerned about is the results.
Of course.
And if he delivers the results, he in himself will know he's done what was asked of him.
Man in the white shirt.
Go back to 2021 against Italy. About 50 million people thought that Southgate should have made changes. After about 60 minutes, he didn't, and we ended up losing that game. The difference is last night he did, and so now he's a hero. He made the right changes last night.
Camilla?
Yeah, he did make some good changes, and I say that as someone who knows nothing about football, but I also defer to you and the other gentleman that he has in the past fluffed it. I just think that actually when things are really grim, as they have been in the last few years, we vest more hope in sport. And I think that's part of the savagery.
I think we always vest hope in sport.
Well, I think it's even worse because it feels even more important. So I think if they do lose on Sunday, presumably we'll all revert to the same savagery again, which would be a shame.
OK. Well, look, it's peace and love in here, as far as Gareth Southgate is concerned. Right, that's all I'm going to do on this, because obviously BBC Sport also do loads on this, but I thought I'd mention it because so many of you want to talk about it. We've only got about, 5-7 minutes left. John Appleby, let's hear from you.
In 2019, Labour lost the Red Wall. This month, Conservative supporters seemingly flocked to Reform UK. Is voter loyalty a thing of the past?
Well, look, Camilla, I thought I'd actually come to you first on this, given your experience, obviously, through the Cameron government, and so are we seeing? It feels like a change in terms of voter switching. Is that what it looks like to you in terms of elections past?
Yeah, I think the simple answer is yes. People definitely are willing to change their vote more often. I think that's a really healthy thing. The first past the post system does give you a stronger and more decisive government, but it does mean that you can get a party, which Peter has at the moment, which is really quite overrepresented in terms of seats. So we now have Reform, I think, got 14% of the vote and has very few seats, and Greens, you got 7% of the vote and have very few seats. I think there's a really interesting argument there for proportional representation. But I do think that what we've seen is quite similar to what we saw after Brexit and with UKIP. I think a lot of the same people are saying that they haven't been heard. I think the Conservatives made a lot of promises, particularly around immigration and particularly around tax, that they didn't deliver on. And I think in a democracy it's very important to listen to those people. And I think what this outcome probably means for Labour is that although you have a landslide governing majority, and that, in my view, is good because that brings stability, you will also have to make sure you govern for the whole country, and that does mean listening to all the people who didn't vote with one of the two big parties.
Can I just see, I know lots of you got your hands up, but is there anyone here who has for many elections voted one way and this election voted another? You in the white top, is that you? Yes, let's hear from you.
So I've always sort of historically voted Conservative, but I chose to vote Labour this time. I probably would have voted Liberal Democrats had I not had to vote tactically, which I think, speaking to a lot of my friends, they've also done as well.
And what made you want to make a switch?
I just had enough of the Tories, basically.
All right, well, let's move to our Tories.
They needed to get out. when I found myself in conversations saying, oh, we should let the other side have a go, that was when I realised that I was actually talking about politicians, not children playing a game as well. So,
George?
Yes. Question, is voter loyalty a thing of the past? One word, yes. It's a bit more complicated than that. I think politicians have to earn loyalty, and let me be very clear with you, my party has taken voters for granted. I think there's a lot of good policies, but the conduct of many of my colleagues in office and my party in office, we've looked as though power is ours by divine right, a crown to be played with while people are suffering, and we've been thrown out unceremoniously for it. But I think it's also... tactical voting has become more of a thing, and that's a response to first past the post. I appreciate there are other responses, and some people want proportional representation, but I think that the electorate's becoming more sophisticated about how to get what it wants. Secondly, I think at the end of the Cold War, the old sort of, yes, there are two types of voters. There are Conservatives, and then there are workers. All that's gone. There's a sort of core 20% who had dyed-in-the-wool Labour voters in my patch, about 25% dyed-in-the-wool Conservative voters. About 55–60% of people will make their mind up as consumers on track record. There is some loyalty, I think, to local MPs if you work really, really hard. But let me be clear. What happened at this election was a collapse, a Chernobyl meltdown of core Conservative support. Yes, Labour have won, and I think they deserve to, given them that track record. But I think this wasn't a 97-style Blair surge of here is a man who will lead us for the next 10, 15 years. Keir is a decent man, but I think this majority was ours lost by bad behaviour, and if we behave properly, we can and must bounce back, because the country needs a good opposition.
You've got about a minute each, so Sian.
I mean, I think we do feel a huge sense of relief that we have lost the worst government that's been around for 14 years and actually removed the Conservatives, but it was much more of an anti-Conservative vote, I think, across the country. I'm really proud of the role that the Greens played in this election. I think we brought some hope into it. The people who voted for us voted for positive things.
But the question is, voter loyalty a thing of the past?
I think people should change their votes when there's something better to vote for, and I hope we'll carry on with that. I think Labour do need... So that Reform do not keep gaining votes, they need to provide some real outcomes for people. They need to keep bringing hope to people. And at the moment, they're not really doing that. And I really hope that I can work constructively to push Labour to do more so that people have got some real things to be pleased with at the end of 5 years.
On Camilla's point, I hope you've seen that the Prime Minister's already been to all 4 nations of the United Kingdom, as well as going to the States straight away. So he is working really hard to try and divide.
Is voter loyalty a thing of the past?
I think, yes, voter loyalty is broadly a thing of the past. I took my seat off of the Conservatives in 2015. If you look at the electoral arithmetic there, then more than half of the people there are voting for a different party than they were before, which is the only way that the maths works. You have to work, you have to renew, you can't take anything for granted. We accept as a Labour Party that after this election, the politics changed the moment the election happened, and the day after, we know that the public have high expectations of us, not just on delivery, but on the tone of politics. Public service will come first. That is what the Prime Minister has set all of us in the Labour Party the task of doing. We want to heal, not divide, in the manner in which we start moving forward as a country. That's the way you renew nationally. Locally, MPs have got to work really hard, because voter loyalty is a thing of the past, and that's actually a good thing for our politics, not a bad thing.
All right, I'm going to have to end it there. Forgive me. Sorry to the rest of you who've got hands up and I haven't got time to come to you. I just want to say our time is up for this programme and for the series this side of the summer. What summer, I hear you say, with the weather we've been having. But anyway, we will return in September. Until then, from all of us, bye-bye.